Okay, here we go. Quadratic formula and zeros. Okay, so you guys, I believe, have seen the quadratic formula at this point before. This is not your first time seeing it. This is a big, ugly equation that there's lots of ways to remember. I'm going to write it out for you. It is x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So this is called the quadratic equation. It looks really big and ugly and scary, but I promise it is not nearly as bad as it looks. All right, so I'm going to take a second and write out a quadratic equation. A few sections ago, there was a really easy part where all you had to do was label the a, the b, and the c. Okay, and so the a, the b, and the c was when you had a quadratic equation that looked kind of like this. You had ax squared. Now that a was the number in front of the x squared, right? So now if you look at the quadratic equation, anywhere you see an a, you're just replacing with that number, okay? It was ax squared plus bx, so again, the number in front of the x with no special exponent is your b, and then the number without an x at the very end was your c. So this was your quadratic equation. We have ax squared plus bx plus c, and this is called the quadratic formula. Okay, it takes this equation and solves it. Okay, it solves it to tell you what values of x would work. Okay, so and again, we have ax squared. This a, I'm just going to replace all these a's in here. This b, I would replace these b's. And this c, there's only one c. Okay, I'm going to work through a couple of these because really this is a PEMDAS problem. It's all about order of operations, and we've kind of been building up to this. There's not a whole lot of solving. All we're really doing is plugging things in and working it out with the correct order of operations. Okay, so I'm going to start with the first example they give you in the book. Okay, and that example is x squared minus 7x plus 12. Okay, and they say y equals. So that's our equation. So the first thing I want to do is I want to label my a's, my b's, and my c's. Okay, so a is a number that is in front of my x squared. So there's my x squared. There is no number in front of it, which means my a is equal to 1. So I'm just going to go over here and write that. A equals 1. And then I want to get my b. So b is the number in front of the x with no exponent. So I'm going to look over here. And this is important. This is a mistake everybody makes. B is not just 7. It includes that negative. So B is going to be negative 7. So I'm going to say B equals negative 7. And then lastly, we have C, which is our number at the end that has no exponents. Oh, that's pretty easy. C is just 12, and just like over here where I kept the negative, I'm going to keep that positive. So C equals 12. Okay, so now I have my A, my B, and my C all picked out. When you're doing these, for the first few, it's always good to get in the habit of just doing this. It helps reinforce what you're doing. And then all I'm going to do is plug all these numbers into this. All right, so you've seen me do this lots of times where I'll write an equation and I'll replace everything that's going to get replaced with a parentheses. So I'm going to write it out first in brown. So this x is going to stay as an x, going to equals negative. That negative's always there, but then I have a b. So I'm going to do a parentheses for b. Plus or minus the square root b squared, so parentheses, squared, minus 4. So again, if you notice, all these signs and numbers that aren't letters, I'm leaving. A, parentheses, C, parentheses, all over 2A. Okay. I almost wish I could have like a dry erase form for this and I could just have this printed on there, and you could just erase it, plug in your numbers, and solve it. You know, I probably could do that. It'd be kind of a cool little tool to have. Anyways, but because you're going to set these up exactly the same every time you do it. And if you do it like this enough, it comes second nature, and you don't make some of the mistakes. Okay, so I'm going to start with my A. So A was right after the 4. So there's my 4, so I'm going to write an A there. Or sorry, a 1, because I know A is 1. Then we'll do B. We have the most B's. B is negative 7. So that first number is B, so I'm going to put a negative 7. And then here I'm going to put a negative 7. Oh, I realized I forgot an A. We have 2A. Okay. So I've done my A's and my B's. All I have left is C. And so C is going to go right here. It's going to be 12. Okay. Really, that's the hard part. The hard part is taking an equation and plugging it into this correctly. At this point, you're just doing basic math. You're just multiplying, you're subtracting. Really, the hardest thing in here is the square root. But you have a cheat sheet for that. Most of these should give you whole numbers. All right, now I'm going to break this down step by step. Okay, I'm going to go slow on this one. So you can, if you know what you're doing, try it. Like pause it, see if you can work it out. Okay, and I tend to work through these in the exact same steps every time. So I'm going to say x equals, so negative 7 is going to become positive 7 plus or minus square root negative 7 squared. And so now the first thing I do is this term, this 4ac. I like to figure out what that is. Okay, so I'm going to say what is 4 times 1? Well, that's 4. 4 times 12, well, that's 4 times 2 is 24. 4 times, or sorry, 2 times 12 is 24, which means 4 times 12 would be 48. So now I'm going to say minus 48. So it's still minus. Okay. And then 2a, I'm going to do that right now. Normally I'll do these in steps and only do one thing at a time, but it's 2 times 1. It's going to give me 2. Okay, so if you look, all I did from here to here is multiplied this together to get me 48. All right, next step. So now I'm going to rewrite it again. X equals 7 plus or minus square root. So now I'm going to do this part. What is 7 squared? So negative 7 times negative 7. Negative 7 times negative 7 is equal to, well, 7 times 7 is 49. Negative times negative is a positive, so 49. Okay, so in here I end up with 49 minus 48. All over 2. Feel free to combine some of these steps at once. I usually will, sometimes I'll combine, go straight from this one to this one, where I'll square it and do the multiplying and do that. But usually here is where I'll stop for sure. Okay, and so now I'm going to do what's 49 minus 48? Well, that's easy. So let's write everything out again. X equals 7 plus minus square root of 1, all over 2. Okay, like I said, see, I'm taking lots of steps to do this, but so far nothing has been that difficult. Square root of 1. What times itself gives you 1? Well, 1 times 1 is 1. So the square root of 1 is just 1. So this is going to give me 7 plus or minus 1 divided by 2. All right. You're basically done. We have to deal with this plus or minus thing. Okay? So with the plus or minus thing, what that tells you is I'm going to have 2 answers. Okay? So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to split this. I'm going to say x equals 7 plus 1 over 2, and x equals 7 minus 1 over 2. There are 2 possible answers for this. Okay? And so now I'm going to say, what is 7 plus 1? Well, that's 8. 8 divided by 2 gives me x equals 4. Over here, 7 minus 1 is going to give me 6. 6 divided by 2 is going to give me x equals 3. Okay, that is a whole lot of stuff for one problem. But I'm just going to step you through it again real fast. So we started with this equation. We figured out what our A, our B, our C was. And then we plugged A, B, and C into the quadratic formula. And once we plugged everything in, it looked like this. Okay. Then I slowly started solving through it. First thing I did was all this, 4 times 1 times 12, and I got 48. Okay. Then I did the 7 squared, and I got 49. So I have 49 minus 48. Then I did 49 minus 48 equals 1. And I get this part. Okay. If this is not an actual number, say this is like, I don't know, 21. There is no square root for 21. So if you get 7 plus or minus a radical that doesn't have an actual square root, you stop at this point. Okay. All right. But then I ended up with this. I split it, and I got 2 answers, and I'm done. Okay. Again, it's a lot of steps for one problem. All right. Let's go on to example 2 now. All right. So example 2 shows us what happens when the quadratic formula doesn't exactly work. All right, so our equation, I'm going to write this one out a little differently this time. So I'm going to write my quadratic equation up at the top. We're going to say x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4a.
It says it's for you.
Yeah.
It's me now.
AC. Okay, so there's my equation. Oh, and then we end up with all of this over 2a. Okay. Okay, so there's my equation, and I'm going to write out the equation they gave me. For this one, they give you y equals 1 x squared minus 5 x plus 9. Okay, so it's already color-coded, so I'm matching everything up. Although the 4 should have been brown, not blue, but that's okay. Okay, so I'm going to take all these color-coded things. I'm going to take my A's, I'm going to replace the A's with that 1. I'm going to replace the B's with that negative 5. And again, notice the 5 and the negative sign are negative. Okay, and then I'm going to replace C with 9. So I'm going to do that real fast. So we're going to say x equals negative b, which is negative 5, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 a c all over 2a. Okay. So there, I've essentially combined that quadratic equation with the quadratic formula, and I get this. This is going to give me my answer. All right, I'm going to do this a little quick because this is already running long. We're almost at 15 minutes already. Okay, so I'm going to simplify it one step at a time. Well, not one step at a time. I'll explain each step one step at a time, but I'm going to go kind of fast. So my x carries over. X equals. So first I want to deal with this. Negative, negative 5. So negative times a negative is a positive 5. plus or minus square root -5 squared, so that's -5 times -5, which gives me positive 25. Okay, now I'm going to do minus, because there's only one negative sign here. If this was -1, then I'd have -4 times -1, which would give me plus. There's only one negative sign, so that's going to carry over. So what is 4 times 1? 4 times 1 is 4. 4 times 9 is 36. So we're going to end up with 25 minus 36. And then on the bottom, we're going to have 2 times 1. So that's going to give us 2. Okay, so you can see I combined all these steps in one and ended up here. And so a lot of the times when I'm doing these, that's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to combine all these little steps in one, but I'll always stop here. Okay, so now I have 5 plus or minus. So we have 5 plus or minus the square root. So what is 25 minus 36? So we have a predicament because normally this first number is going to be bigger, so that when I subtract the second number, I get a positive. But in this case, 36 is bigger, which means I'm going to end up with a negative 11 over 2. Okay, so here's the issue. Square root is when you take the same number and multiply it by itself twice. When you have a negative number in the square root, there is no number that exists that can do that. Like, just as a thought experiment, see if you can figure out two numbers that you can multiply together to give you -4. Well, you know the square root of 4 is 2, right? But 2 times 2 doesn't give you -4. -2 times -2 doesn't give you -4. The only way to get this is by saying -2 times 2. But these aren't the same numbers. So again, when you have a negative square root, there is no solution. So if you get to this point, you end up with some number plus or minus a negative square root. Your answer is just no solution. Okay, and that's it. Like I said, it's a long section. I'm going to post another video of a guy, one of my favorites, Sven, who is just talking about how to remember the quadratic equation. He's hilarious. I love him. But anyways, there you go. That's 2 problems, and it's only 2. It takes a while, but trust me, once you've done these a few times, it gets faster, and this is not as terrible as it looks. All right, good luck, guys. Let me know if you have any questions.